All right, so we are still continuing to get more and more details coming out of the police failures surrounding the elementary school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, and it has gotten so bad for some of these police officers that apparently the school district chief of police right here is no longer even cooperating with investigators on exactly how this played out and exactly what the decisions were that he was making on the scene at the time. So we're going to get into some of the details here and then get into some more details about some of the other various lies that they have been telling throughout this entire process. But honestly, before we get into this, a lot of these details might even change in the future because they have literally been lying about pretty much every single aspect of this from start to where we are right now. So, it's still a very complicated thing that we're trying to piece together, but makes it that much more difficult when you have completely unreliable sources who are now, again, refusing to fully cooperate with the investigators. So, some details here from NPR. They say the Texas Department of Public Safety says it's having trouble setting up a follow-up conversation with Pete Arredondo, who was the chief of the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District Police Department, about the deadly school shooting at Robb Elementary School. And they say Arredondo has disputed this characterization, telling reporters that he has been in regular contact with DPS. Okay, already, why would they be coming out and saying that you're not cooperating with them if you actually were fully cooperating with them? Doesn't really make any sense, but they continue saying Arredondo and his department have been under scrutiny since last Tuesday's shooting, and the questions intensified on Friday when Department of Public Safety Director Stephen McCraw told journalists that the incident commander, who was this guy Arredondo, made a critical error treating the active shooter situation as one where the subject had barricaded themselves away from police. And they say instead of immediately engaging with the active shooter inside the school, which by the way is supposed to be the normal approach that police are taught in these active shooter situations. Whoever the first officers are on scene, they're supposed to go in and confront him as soon as possible. There's no situation where you have an active shooter where you're supposed to just stand around and wait for some tactical team to come in and breach the door or whatever the case is. You're supposed to confront them as soon and as quickly as possible. So basically the excuse that they're now post hoc coming up with seems to be that they're saying, oh, well, we thought that it was no longer a mass shooting incident. We thought that this guy had barricaded himself in there and it was either a hostage situation or it was just a barricaded gunman situation. And so they're saying that they thought they had time to basically wait around for this tactical team to come in and breach the door. Now, the problem with that is that we know for a fact that there were multiple, and when I say multiple, I mean like almost a dozen phone calls that were being made from within the classroom where the shooter was to 911 and basically begging the police to come in and help them. I mean, you had literal kids who were on the phone with 911 operators while the cops were standing outside waiting, pretending as if this was a neutralized situation for them and that they had the time to wait, while more kids were bleeding out inside, more kids were continuing to get shot. So, basically a complete lie there, or at least, I wouldn't even call it a miscalculation or a misjudgment on the scene because, again, you had the people who were calling 911 while this was happening, and you still waited upwards of an hour to actually go in and end up confronting the shooter. So, how many kids died bleeding out or getting shot during the interim period that they were just being cowards essentially and standing outside of the door? But they continue here saying that approach allowed the gunman to operate inside the school for more than an hour, killing 19 children and 2 teachers. Another 17 people were wounded, so nearly 40 people having casualties within this mass shooting. But they continue saying a DPS spokesperson told NPR late on Tuesday that Arredondo has yet to respond to the Rangers' request for a follow-up interview that was made a couple days ago. And the DPS spokesman said members of the Uvalde City Police and the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District are still cooperating with its investigation. So it seems like the main figure here who really is not cooperating, even though he says that he is, according to the actual Department of Public Safety, the person who is not cooperating with these investigations is the guy who is arguably the most responsible because he was the person who was the on-site commander and he was giving the orders to stand down and wait and not confront the shooter. So, this is a guy that we're going to have to be looking and centering in a lot of our attention on during this investigation, but he's not cooperating anymore, so yet to be seen exactly how much we can get out of him. But they continue here with a little bit more details, this time from the Independent. Just to add insult to injury, they are also apparently threatening journalists who are trying to do interviews with this guy, Pete Arredondo, and literally threaten to have them charged with trespassing for going there and asking him tough questions questions and trying to do what journalists are supposed to be doing. So, on top of not cooperating with the investigation, they are also threatening journalists with trespassing for trying to do their jobs. But we have a little bit more details on here, which is, I think, kind of interesting as a component to this. So this guy, Pedro Pete Arredondo, the main commanding officer, again, who we've been talking about, he actually, before this mass shooting, like literally just a couple weeks before this mass shooting, was elected to be the on the city council for Uvalde. And so, this is an interesting component to this, because I'm sure that a lot of people who live in Uvalde, very small town of 15,000 or so people, I'm sure that they are going to have second guessing in terms of whether or not they want this guy to be a representative on the city council, now that there's more information coming out about the specifics of this. But let's go ahead and read in some of the details in this article. They say the Uvalde School District Police Chief, Pedro Pete Arredondo, who authorities say erroneously ordered officers to wait outside the Robb Elementary classroom where a gunman killed 21 last week, has been sworn in to the Texas Community's City Council. And they say the orders given by Arredondo to police officers responding to the 24th of May massacre at Robb Elementary have come under intense scrutiny. Officials have said that students and teachers again begged 911 operators for help, as Arredondo told more than a dozen officers to wait in the hallway outside the classroom where all of the murders occurred, believing the gunman was barricaded in an adjoining classroom and no longer actively endangering students or teachers. That was completely wrong. And they say waiting was the wrong decision, according to the Texas Department of Public Safety leader, Stephen McCraw, who we just heard from before. And he says, obviously, there were children in that classroom at risk. So this guy has blood on his hands. I mean, let's be real about it. You as a police officer, number one, when there's an active shooter situation, the typical protocol is for whoever gets there first, basically, regardless of how much body armor you have, regardless of what the context may be. Your job as a police officer is to go in and even potentially get shot. Your job is to go in there and die in order to confront this shooter as quickly and efficiently as possible. That's your job, okay? It's preferable if we had 19 police officers who immediately rushed into the scene and they ended up dying, versus having 19 innocent school children dying. But nonetheless, they decided to basically wait outside for almost an hour under the order of this guy Arredondo. But finally, they finish off here saying, after repeated mass killings nationwide in recent decades, again, here on the policy of what police are supposed to do. They say police have been trained to fight active shooters and neutralize them as quickly as possible instead of cornering them and waiting for backup. And they say Arredondo had taken multiple courses aimed at handling school-based active shooter scenarios before the slayings under his watch, according to CBS News and other media outlets. So this guy has already taken the training necessary, okay? This isn't a training issue. He went through this. He knew exactly what the protocol was supposed to be. And it seems like, honestly, that he was just a coward when it actually came down to, addressing this situation. And you did have a real active shooter situation that he was the active commander during. It seems like he was just a coward. He wasn't willing to go in there, wasn't willing to confront the shooter, and decided to basically pretend like it was no longer an active shooter situation to justify waiting for more heavily armed tactical team units to arrive on the scene. So, this is the current information that we have right now. Again, I think this guy's a complete coward and a fraud and a liar, along with many of the other members of the police force who have been lying throughout this entire process. But just another quote here to hammer it home in terms of how much of a demon this guy seems to be. Here from No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, he said, a CNN reporter just confronted the Uvalde School District Police Chief. This is when they ended up threatening them with trespassing. And he said to ask why they are refusing to cooperate with the investigation into their response. And the police chief said that they will only explain themselves to parents once the families quit grieving. Once the families, what the fuck are you talking about, man? Once the families quit grieving. Okay, these families are not going to quit grieving for the rest of their lives. I mean, what kind of a statement is that? That, not only doesn't correspond with reality in terms of what the grief process would look like for somebody who just lost a kid during a mass shooting, but also if you go and actually listen to the parents themselves, they don't want you to wait until they're finished grieving or when they quit grieving. They want information right now. All of the parents are coming out and begging for an accurate timeline and details on what exactly happened and where the failures were within the police operation responding to this. They want the answers. answers to that. So, to come out and say something like this is just completely, absurd and just a slap in the face to all of the parents who are begging for answers right now. But again, this is not the only lie that we've heard, okay? This is not the only time that we've seen these police officers come out and change their story so many times. And this is why it's so difficult to cover this story, not just because of how tragic and horrible it was, but also because it's been, a wildly changing story. It's been shifting day by day. And it's only now that we're starting to get a more clearer picture of exactly how this all played out. But just to run you through some of the biggest lies that they told us initially. Number one was that they said that there was police officers outside of the school who engaged with the shooter, is the terminology that they used at the time, but they basically said that they got into somewhat of a skirmish, a gun battle with the shooter before he ended up making it inside the school. Turns out nobody confronted him outside, and not only that, but it seems like, according to the information that we have right now, that the school resource officer who was supposed to be on scene at this time, he was nowhere to be found. He wasn't even there on the school campus when this shooter crashed his car and then ended up going into the school. So they lied about the fact that somebody apparently tried to prevent him from going into the school in the first place. Apparently that wasn't true. And one of the other more egregious lies that they had down here was talking about how they blamed a school teacher, essentially. So you had, even high-level Texas politicians like Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor of Texas, who came out and literally said, or at least implied, that the teacher who apparently propped this back door open that the shooter went through, turns out it didn't even happen. The door was not propped open. She had closed it, noticing that the shooter was on scene. So she closed the door behind her. Apparently it didn't lock. It's supposed to be auto-locking. So no culpability on the part of this teacher whatsoever. But you had high-level politicians like the lieutenant governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, coming out and literally saying that she had blood on her hands for doing that. And you got motherfuckers like Ted Cruz coming out here and, saying that this is more of a door control situation than a gun control situation. So, all throughout this process, we're, just getting another clear picture in terms of how completely unreliable police officers are as sources. And so I hope that this is a learning moment for members of the media and for, the general American public, that this is not anything that is out of the ordinary. This is very consistent. They even have a specific word for it. Cops call it test-a-lying, and, so this is something that they do on a regular basis. If there's anything that police are actually effective at doing, it's lying, okay? It's not protecting public safety. It's not protecting and serving communities. It is protecting and serving the interest of capital, cracking down using state violence against the poorest and most vulnerable people in the country, and apparently on top of that, being complete and utter cowards when it actually comes to a moment where they can be the brave Rambo-style heroes that they want to pretend that they are.